Hey, we're excited to be back with you this week. We hope you've got a great start to the week already. It's Tuesday. Holy mackerel, can you believe
I
it?
know, February, crazy how fast this
Yeah, we
year's
smashed
going.
January and February's already here.
Yep.
And we're like almost a full week into it.
Yeah, so just a sneak peek, we're going to be offering a marriage mentorship, a 10-week course coming up in April. Be watching for the details. We'll be sharing that periodically over the next couple of days, probably in about 5 days or so. If you'd like to know more about that, go to Gorman Leadership. I know we always send you to marriedforapurpose.com. That's where you'll find all of our marriage mentorship and different things. But until we get this landing page to capture you and to share more information, go to Gorman Leadership. Go to the Contact Us section, send us a note that you'd like to know more about the 10-week course that we're going to be offering this year to make marriage thrive. So we're going to be sharing the 10 secrets to making marriage thrive, not just survive. So
Yeah, baby.
pretty exciting. And as we go into Valentine's Day especially, we're going to be offering a special offer surrounding that. So again, if you want to know more information about that, go to gormanleadership.com, hit that contact button and send us a note, and we'll be sure to keep it in the loop.
Right on. So hey, check it out. We were talking this morning. We're like, geez, what should we talk about with you all this week, and maybe even in the upcoming weeks? And as we were thinking about that, praying about it, we were talking about some of the things. We always try to bring you what's going on in our lives and what's really relevant to us, because we figure if it's relevant to us, it must be relevant to you, because you're a couple. So we were reminded this last week. We're leading a study with one of our books, Two Are Better Than One, leading a small group study. And a couple of the folks, as we were wrapping up the study and just doing fellowship and stuff, came up to us, and in conversation they mentioned our kids. And when they figured out who our kids were, boy, they just started doting on our kids. And they were like, oh man, you can just tell that, that they're good kids and that they've been raised well. And we were incredibly honored.
Yeah.
And it's always good to get those kind of reports about your kids from somebody else, especially when it's honest and it's not, flattery or whatever. And we were just talking about how often that happens to us. And, we've talked over the years a lot, and people have asked us to do a parenting book, which we're thinking may be our next book project, or at least one of them for sure in the next year or so. If that's what you'd like us to do, to make sure and let us know.
Yeah, be sure to leave a comment. Say, yes, I'd love principles to parent today's teens in today's times.
Yeah, right. But we've held back on doing something like that because we felt like, geez, we want to make sure that we at least launch one of them into the real world successfully.
Right.
And that we do parent through some teenage years, because I'm not sure I feel qualified to speak to parenting at all until, you've crested some of those teenage years. So currently we have a 23-year-old who's beautiful and doing a great job in the world. She's married and a worship leader.
Hi, Courtney.
And,
we love you.
Right? And all of those good things. And then our middle daughter, Summer, is now 18.
We love you too, Summer.
Yes, we do. Almost 2 years of college under her belt while she's going to school. So she's dual enrolled, almost perfect straight A student, holding down a job, just doing a great job. And then Joshua, our 15-year-old, who
we love you too, Joshua.
Also love.
Sorry.
And just since you got it started, we got to make sure we treat them equally. But anyway, Josh is doing great too, and he's well respected. He's doing great in school. They're just great kids. They represent us well. And so 16, 18, 23. So we're like, okay, maybe we're qualified, maybe we're not. But as much as we've blown it in parenting over the years, there are a few principles that we learned, most of them fairly early on, that we embraced, that we feel like have really made a tremendous impact. So as we talked and prayed about this, we said, hey, maybe we should go ahead and bring some parenting principles to the table and see how you respond to it. So now Julie mentioned a minute ago that if you're watching this and you're interested in what it is that we're talking about as it applies to parenting, you really need to let us know. Besides that, if you like our broadcasts that we do on these Facebook Lives, We really need you to make a comment. Just tell us hi. If we say something you like, put the comment there, whatever. Listen, it's not for us. It's so that, I mean, look, you know how this whole Facebook rhythm thing, right? You know how that works.
Those algorithms.
That's right. So when you comment, then it keeps it pushed up in everybody else's feed. When you like, it pushes it up in the feed. But when you comment, it boosts it even more. And then if you comment on somebody else's comment, then it boosts it even higher. So the more comments and the more you can engage with us while we're on here, or later on when you watch this, if you're watching the recorded version, then the more it helps to keep it boosted up in the feed. So, on to the topic for the day. Is that why you're tapping my foot?
I'm tapping. I was doing one of these things. You can't see it, but I was actually tapping his hand saying, okay, we need to move on.
Yeah, she's cool like that.
Sorry. One of those still wifely habits that I do. Probably
Anyway.
not a best practice.
Anyway.
So today, what we do want to dive into are the three, and we promised that we would share just 3 foundations that we found over the years that have helped, have worked. And the very first one is that we're going to talk about today in more depth is rules without relationship equals rebellion. Mm-hmm. So rules without relationship equals rebellion. The second principle is that we followed is teaching our kids how to think, not just what to think. So we really want to invest in them and help them to begin that process of
thinking on their own so they can be successful in the world, right?
Yeah. So we'll share some principles that are pretty unique about that in future broadcasts. And then the third one was never parent out of guilt or manipulation. So Greg, building on relationship, how does a couple truly set the foundation for building relationships that are healthy with their kids?
Repeating the principle. So the first one this week that we're going to dive into, rules without relationship equal rebellion. Now listen, this is not just exclusive to your marriage. In fact, it's I would say that I first started learning this as I began to understand my faith better. Mm-hmm. Because at one point, I approached faith from a very legalistic standpoint. It was all about the rules in the Bible. And to be honest with you, when I did that, it really felt like God was kind of a buzzkill. Yeah. You know? Like it's just all about keeping the rules and making sure that I do everything right. And listen, at some point I realized that if that's what it's all about, I'm not saying it's not important, okay? But if that's what it's all about, then why did God send Christ? And what is it exactly that he died for anyway? You with me? So, as it applies to the parenting relationship, I think it's really easy as parents to many times knee-jerk into the idea that it's because I said so, or it's because that's what the rules are. This is what you do, this is what you don't do. And I learned, I guess, just with Courtney for one thing, and as we've studied leadership over the years, that people will do, let me rephrase that, our kids will do what we tell them to do up until maybe somewhere around 13 years old or so. Somewhere between 13 and 16, there's a significant shift. And those of you who have teenagers, you know what I'm talking about. Because see, when they're younger, they tend to do what they're told. But then as they become adults, as they begin to move closer to adulthood, they do what the rest of us do. They don't do what they're told. They do what they see. We tend to model out what we see. And so as we begin to even recognize that and see that modeled out in our kids, it made a big impression on us. And we realized that we had to start actually living in such a way that we were trying to tell them to live. Right. Because they're gonna do what they see us do, not just what we tell them to do. And so I think in order for us to build relationship with them, we have to practice a basic leadership principle, and that is to lead by example.
Yeah, I think another great leadership principle is to communicate value.
You bet.
To make sure that if we want to build relationship, we have to be intentional in that pursuit, to make sure that we are communicating our kids' value, that we're communicating our values as a parent, both in modeling it out and then also in our intent. And so a lot of the times what we've tried to make a practice of is not just saying, you do this because I told you to do this,
Right.
but we give them the why behind
yeah.
it. And we share with them, we are saying no to this, and if you'll allow us, we'd like to share with you why.
Yeah.
And in that conversation with them, we share some of the concerns we have. We ask them in a conversation to how do they feel about that particular concern.
Right.
So we've made it a real practice, for example, and this is not that you have to adopt our practices or anything, we're not saying that, but one of the principles, for example, that we've held in our home is to not let our kids spend the night at other people's houses. Now that could be controversial, and there's good things, there's bad things about it, but we've just kind of made it a standing note for the most part, 95%
Well, yeah.
of the
Can you explain
time.
the exception? What's the exception there? Because I really think the exception is
Well,
important.
you tell the exception.
Okay. That's the I'm not sure. What is the exception code?
Very
Anyway.
rarely is there an exception.
No,
Yeah.
really. Here is the exception, though. We really need to know the parents. That's the key. And the reason is
And know
because,
them.
Yeah. So it's not that we've never let our kids stay the night with someone else, but a general rule is that we don't let them spend the night with someone else unless we really know the family, because there's just too many risks involved with it today. You
Right,
know?
and so we've given different examples. We've shared concerns about things that have happened and other things that could happen. And in that conversation, we've invited their pushback, and there were different times over different seasons that we did make concessions. But in that conversation, we communicated our intent, that our intent was to protect. Our intent was because we loved them. Our intent wasn't to be a buzzkill. Our intent wasn't. And we gave extended curfews for times when they were going to be out doing things that would be later, but usually around 11 or 11:30, midnight.
It depends on the kid.
Depending on the kid, we'd
Yeah.
go and pick
And the
them up.
activity.
And the activity and the whole circumstances around it. But in that, what we did is it wasn't just, no, you're not going to go. I don't care if you don't like it, because that's just the rule. What we did is we started talking about the heart behind the rule.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just a rule for rule's sake. And that comes back to rules without relationship equals rebellion. And so we didn't want to just have hard, fast rules. We wanted to communicate the why behind the rule.
Absolutely. And I think another thing, as you were talking there, I was just thinking about this. It wasn't a matter of, and it's still not a matter of parenting out of fear either.
Oh, no.
It's not a fear-based parenting. It's really logical, and explaining and having that conversation. So that's one thing. Another thing that I was thinking about again as you were talking there is a conversation that we've had with our kids many different times, and with each one of our kids we've had this, and that is that when we parent and when we say no or when we say yes, what our motives are in that. Mm-hmm. In other words, we frequently share with our kids, look, if you can visualize the dashboard on a car and you can get the RPM gauge, right? And we call that RPM gauge, we're going to say that's the fun gauge in life, right? We want you to redline on fun. We really want you to max out on fun. We want you to have as much fun as you can possibly have, but we don't want you to blow the engine.
Yeah.
And so I don't even know how that came about, but it's literally a conversation that we've had with each one of the kids. So here's what that conversation kind of looks like. So we'll sit down, and it usually comes when we've got to impose a rule that they may or may not dig, or maybe we have to ground them or impose some sort of consequence for something that they've done. So we like to present it kind of like this, and this is not verbatim, but it's somewhere in this ballpark. It's like, hey, look, I'm not into punishing you. I have no desire, I get no buzz, I get no enjoyment out of inflicting pain or heartache on you.
Right.
I want you to redline on fun, in fact. Like, it brings me so much pleasure when you find pleasure in life and when you're having fun and enjoying life and in a good mood and, and all these different things. But the truth is that you need to kind of understand how this parenting thing works. See, our responsibility, what we agree on, this was a big thing for us when we came together on a central purpose for our parenting. It really helped us to have less arguments about parenting.
Right.
And allowed us to come in alignment in one particular purpose for parenting. And the purpose for our parenting is simply this. Our desired outcome is that we raise kids that can live a life of significance and be successful in the real world.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
And that have their own faith, that their faith isn't borrowed. In other words, that their faith isn't just because it's what we believe. That they grow up having an understanding of what God means to them. And it's theirs, so that when life challenges them, they've got something real to hang on rather than just some idea that was passed down through the generations, right?
Yep.
So we want you to redline on fun. We don't want you to blow the engine. So what that means is that we're going to give you some slack in the line and let you run out there so far and operate in that area for, until you can demonstrate that you can handle that much freedom and that you can actually make good judgment calls and handle, this amount of judgment on your own, right? Mm-hmm. And then when we see you operating well there, we're going to let a little bit more line, a little bit more slack, right? So that you can run out a little bit further. And we're going to watch you operate there. And if you operate well right there, then we're going to let a little more slack in the line. Are you with me so far? But sooner or later, as we're letting out the slack in the line, giving you more privileges, giving you more freedom, sooner or later, you're probably going to have a trouble and demonstrate that you may or may not be able to handle this much freedom, that you can't handle these kind of decisions.
Right.
And so when that happens, just understand we're going to reel you back in just a little bit. We're probably not going to reel you back just one rung on the ladder, so to speak.
Yeah.
We're going to reel you back probably a couple. Why? Because there's a fundamental principle here somewhere leading up to that point that we failed to instill well in you so that you could handle this much freedom and this many privileges. All we want you to do is when you run out here and we give you those freedoms, is we want you to demonstrate. So here's what the awesome benefit for the child is, right? That conversation incentivizes them to demonstrate good judgment, doesn't it? Because it tells them in advance that the more that you handle these decisions and these freedoms well, then the more we're going to let more line out there and give you more and more privileges. So as long as you're demonstrating good judgment, you've got the freedom to make your own decisions. When you make a bad decision, there's going to be consequences for that. But it's not because we get off on making you feel bad or punishing you or anything like that. Right. It's because we want you to be successful in life and live a life of significance. Is that fair?
And in our discipline even, and throughout our relationship with our kids, what we found is asking a lot of questions. So in the discipline, we'll say, we're going to have to take this privilege away. Why do you think that we're doing that? And we let them tell us why. And if they've missed something, we'll bring it in. We'll talk about what the consequence was.
Always a discussion.
There is always a discussion around it. And I think that that's the other principle too, is that we ask a lot of questions to our kids.
Yeah, we do.
We are intentional to hold conversations. So for me, it is a big stickler that we have dinner around the table at least 3 to 5 times a week, that even as our kids are teens and busy going a lot of directions, we're traveling, we have intentional conversations every week that are meaningful. So we'll play games like high-low, where they get to say 2 highs of their day, or they can do a high of the day and a low of the day, but they can never have 2 lows of the day. And the idea isn't, well, I went to school and I ate breakfast. They can't tell us something that we didn't know. They have to come up with something throughout their day that truly we wouldn't have known had they not told us. So that's one great way that we've stayed connected with them. And the other brilliant part about that just happened by default, is their relationships with one another also became stronger. Because as they watched maybe one of their siblings having something controversial happen at school, or something that caused them to feel hurt inside, and as that other sibling shared the hurt. There was compassion for one another. There was, man, we're the Gormans. You mess with one of us, you're going to mess with all of us. Was fostered in that we are a united team.
And everybody gets to learn from everybody else's journey when we're doing that. And it really does build relationships. So again, the point of high-low, the game high-low, one person starts out, Joshua may start out and just say, all right, high-low summer or high-low mommy or whatever. And then, we do what Julie said. You can do 2 highs. You can do 1 high and 1 low. But just for the sake of, again, teaching them higher thoughts and that you gravitate towards what you contemplate, which you all have heard us talk about a lot, we never let 2 lows. It always has to be at least 1 high, because there's always at least one thing positive that we can find if we're looking for it. Mm-hmm. And so the point is that we're seeking in that to get them to engage and tell us what's going on in their life, not just give blanket no content answers, but really tell us what's going on in their day. And as you do it, as we've done it over time, everybody they know what time it is. You know what I mean? They share, they engage, and you know what? If they don't, we call them on it. We're like, come on, I don't know what Siri wants, but
Siri's going to try to talk right in the middle.
Yeah, Siri wants to play high-low. Anyway, if somebody does give us a canned, no depth answer, then we call them on it. We're like, come on, man, you gotta give me something. What's really going on? What's your biggest challenge, or what's your biggest win of the day? What are you proud of right now in your life? And just kind of dig out some real stuff.
So people often ask us, do you guys do devotions every single day? And there have been seasons.
Absolutely, every day. I mean, we're Christians after all.
There have been seasons of times that we actually have had those devotionals, and a lot of times that was when they were younger. There was intentionally reading and taking
making sure that they're getting the Bible stories and stuff that we grew up with.
And now I'm actually coming into a season with one of my kids that I am having a personal devotion with them to grow them and help them in their reading, in their presentation, as well as their spiritual journey because of the calling that's on their life.
You bet.
So there are different seasons that we've done that, but the one thing that we have done is on a weekly basis. Coming back from church, we've used church to be the common place where we talk about a theme.
We mastermind the sermon.
We mastermind the sermon, and we talk about what did you get from it?
Yeah.
How does that apply? How were you challenged? How were you inspired? And we'll have conversations where everyone takes a turn. And then usually after everyone has kind of taken their turn of sharing, we have more dialogue and conversations about it that spill over throughout the week. We are doing some things like trying to memorize scripture. So as you know, last week was 1 Corinthians 4:2, where above all, it's required of a steward to be found trustworthy. And that spills over into conversations of how is God calling you to be a steward? What's he calling you to be a steward in? Right. How can you be faithful right now where you are? Because you don't have to wait 10 years to be an influence for Christ. You can be an influence right where you are right now. So What does it mean to be found trustworthy? And those kinds of conversations frequently take place. But it's not necessarily for us, and how it works for us, a very regimented, we're going to sit down, we're going to read for this long.
No, but it is intentional.
But it is intentional.
Yeah. Those conversations have been what?
Yeah, so real quick, what I would encourage you in that is, what is your system to have intentional conversation? How can you intentionally share and communicate your heart's intent? How can you develop those conversations? It might be in a high-low game like we learned to do. It might be in a conversation coming back. But to really choose 1 or 2 ways that you find work with your family that you can begin to have in conversations that are not this superficial up here, but of intent of heart, and that your heart is truly for your kids.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna put a point on what the last principle that you were sharing there, and thing that you were talking about, those conversations coming home from church.
Yeah.
Those have been some really great conversations. sometimes, again, we have to challenge them, because, and honestly, there's times when I'm like, oh, man, I'm just being straight with you. There's times when it's like I really have to dig. I'm like, okay, what did I take from it, and how can I articulate it? But there's a lot of things that are happening in those conversations, I think, for all of us. And that is, one, is that we're learning how to articulate our learnings, so that we can share them with other people, and how we were challenged. And then the other thing is just intentionally doing some self-reflection of the things. And then, of course, there's always just the communication as a family. And if I'm honest, there's been some times that the learnings or the takeaways that the kids have shared, or certainly some that Julie has shared, have really challenged me. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't think of it that way. That's really good. So it's good stuff. It's some of the best conversations that we have. So
as we wrap up today, we want to encourage you just to foster a relationship with your kids. What we've discovered is that rules without a relationship equals rebellion. The best ways that we found to foster that relationship is to be intentional in our heart's intent, to ask questions, to draw them back into conversations, to
engage in them in the parenting process, by explaining why we make the decisions that we make, and even asking them when it comes time for a punishment or just so it is
consequence.
A consequence. That's a
For a
word
decision,
really that I was looking for, because I don't. Punishment, there's something in me that just resists that verbiage for some reason, because it's a punishment, but it's less about the punishment, and it's more about them understanding. So in that, even in the consequences that we offer, love,
right,
they are usually, if possible, directly connected to the behavior itself.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Well, but what I mean is like, let's say somebody said something inappropriate on their phone, or they spent too much time on it, or we have a rule that, at 7:30 they're supposed to shut the phones off and park it, because in the evening time we don't want them to spend their whole night, on the phone and for
it also
anything.
affects their sleep patterns have been out there, so we explain why.
Blue screens.
So some of the whys behind it, the blue screen causes the disruption in the sleep, and we just get their buy-in with that.
I want them to ramp down from that stuff in the evening in time. And so if there is some sort of a social foul or an abuse of that privilege, then we'll ask them, what do you think the punishment should be, or the consequence for this should be? And you know what? I'm telling you, all too often, especially now, they nail it. I mean, they're usually just almost spot on with where we're at. Now, there's a lot of years of a lot of discussion, a lot of relationship building that's gone into this, but the whole point is really simply this. It's really, man, what's more important? Are the rules the most important? Or is the relationship more important? At the end of the day, what's really going to matter? And there's a scripture that says, fathers, don't exasperate your children. And it's something, boy, that has really challenged me, because as Julie shared with you many times, I'm a person of excellence. I value excellence. It's literally one of my core values. So it's easy for me to exasperate not just my children, but the people around me if I'm not careful, including myself. And so, though that's a great quality to have, it's also something that I've had to learn to make sure that I govern, if you will, that I restrain a little bit, and also make sure that I'm practicing praise, and just making sure that I'm really putting forth a genuine effort to connect and build relationship and help them understand why we make the decisions that we make.
So I have to share one last story. You were talking, and as you were sharing, it reminded me of a time when one of our kids did something really not acceptable. And so we asked, what do you think the consequence should be? And she began to tell us all of the things that would normally be the consequence.
She was dead on.
And she was dead on. However, we said, you're right. That's exactly what should happen. But what we felt God impressed on us was to just extend the same grace to you that he had extended to us. And so in this situation, this and this is going to happen. And grace is going to cover the other. Now, what you need to know is if this pattern perpetuates or happens again, then what you originally said will be the consequence.
Yep.
And the reason I think that came to mind is because the importance of bringing the Holy Spirit into your parenting is so vital.
Yeah, it really is.
Every single one of our kids have been raised under the same parenting principles.
Yep.
Each one of them operate and have different needs based off of those parenting principles, and the Holy Spirit has shown up so powerfully, highlighted something in Scripture or put a one-liner that went through our head to help us in our parenting. And I remember in that particular one, man, I was so undone. I was so angry.
We had a lot of discussion and a lot of prayer
Yep.
about this particular instance.
Situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there had been a lot of consequences
Yeah.
for fouls, and first one thing and another. But on this one, the grace and the message of grace was what was most important for this child to understand in that
Yep.
season. And so I'll never forget that. It was a powerful moment. It's like, I have to choke
Replaying
back.
it.
Yeah, big time.
And the relationship that
Yeah.
was built in that, since
Yep.
we're talking about rules without relationship equals rebellion, that was a real foundational time in our building of relationship with that child, to realize that, grace is still there for when we make a mistake. And there was buy-in that was brought in because grace was extended rather than the consequences for the action. And so all of that.
Can't always do that. But
No, you can't always do that. But
Yeah.
again, that's the importance of bringing the Holy Spirit into your parenting. Any final thoughts?
No, I think that's it, really. I mean, I have tons and tons of other thoughts, but
Maybe
if y'all
we do
like
like
this,
this parenting stuff.
well, it's been fun, and it's definitely been something that's challenged us over the years, probably more than anything else. I say there's a couple of things that God does to keep us humble in our lives, and one is marriage, and the other one is kids. They do a great job of keeping me humble in both cases.
So thanks for letting us share some of the things that we've discovered. We'd love for you to leave a comment. What's been one of your best practices
Please
in
share.
parenting? Be sure to share them in the comments section. Also coming back to the 10 weeks of mentorship that we're going to be doing. Be sure to go to gormanleadership.com, hit that contact button, and just say, hey, send me info about the 10 weeks, the 10 secrets of a thriving marriage.
Yep, we'll keep you posted on that and let you know what the lowdown's going to be.
Until then,
Have a blessed week.
all right.